Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Bamako, Mali, special forces have stormed the American-owned Radisson Blu Hotel after gunmen seized control of the hotel early this morning. The hotel has at least 140 guests and 30 staff. At least 3 people have been reportedly killed. State television reports 80 hostages may have been freed. We'll have more on the developing situation after headlines. The French Senate is expected to approve President François Hollande's plan to extend the state of emergency by 3 months and to grant Hollande a sweeping expansion of state powers. The measures include easing police raids without a warrant and allowing the government to strip citizenship from dual passport holders convicted of terrorism. French authorities say they carried out more than 414 raids on Wednesday, arrested 64 people, and placed another 118 under house arrest. In news from Israel and the occupied territories, 5 people were killed on Thursday in 2 separate attacks Israeli police say were carried out by Palestinians. In Tel Aviv, authorities say a Palestinian man fatally stabbed 2 Israeli men. Hours later, a Palestinian man allegedly opened fire outside a Jewish-only Israeli settlement in the occupied West Bank, killing 3 people, including an 18-year-old American student, Ezra Schwartz, of Massachusetts. Israeli spy Jonathan Pollard has been released from a North Carolina prison after 30 years behind bars. Pollard's a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer sentenced to life in prison for passing U.S. secrets to Israel. In 1999, Seymour Hersh of The New Yorker reported Israel was suspected of sharing some of Pollard's material with the Soviet Union in exchange for continued Soviet permission for Jewish emigration to Israel. He's been granted Israeli citizenship while in prison and says he now hopes to move to Israel. The terms of his parole require him to stay in the United States for 5 years. In Washington, the House approved legislation Thursday to impose significant restrictions on Iraqi and Syrian refugees seeking to resettle in the United States. The American Security Against Foreign Enemies Act passed the House with nearly unanimous Republican support and the backing of 47 Democrats. The legislation would require the Secretary of Homeland Security, the FBI Director, and the Director of National Intelligence to personally approve every Syrian or Iraqi refugee's application, in addition to the current 18-month screening process. After the vote, CNN Global Affairs correspondent Elise Labott promptly suspended by the network for 2 weeks after she tweeted, quote, "House passes bill that could limit Syrian refugees. Statue of Liberty bows head in anguish." Meanwhile, Republican frontrunners Donald Trump and Ben Carson are both under fire for comments they've made about refugees and Muslims in the wake of the Paris attacks. On Thursday, Dr. Ben Carson used an analogy to, quote, rabid dogs in defending his opposition to the resettlement of Syrian refugees. Carson's campaign also issued a map of the United States depicting the states where more than 24 governors have said they oppose resettlement, but the map erroneously placed 5 New England states in the wrong location. Meanwhile, Donald Trump took calls for a religious test on incoming refugees one step further when an NBC reporter asked whether Trump would implement a database to track all American Muslims.
There should be a lot of systems beyond database. I mean, we should have a lot of systems. And today you can do it. But right now we have to have a border, we have to have strength, we have to have a wall, and we cannot let what's happening to this country happen.
But that's something your White House would like to implement.
Oh, I would certainly implement that. Absolutely.
Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has outlined her foreign policy proposals, which call for intensifying and accelerating President Obama's strategy against the Islamic State. Speaking to the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, Clinton called for sending more U.S. special forces to Syria and for imposing a no-fly zone over Syria.
Effective coalition air campaign is necessary, but not sufficient. And we should be honest about the fact that to be successful, airstrikes will have to be combined with ground forces actually taking back more territory from ISIS. Like President Obama, I do not believe that we should again have 100,000 American troops in combat in the Middle East. That is just not the smart move to make here. If we've learned anything from 15 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's that local people and nations have to secure their own communities. We can help them, and we should, but we cannot substitute for them.
Hillary Clinton also proposed a, quote, intelligence surge and called on technology companies to work with the government on issues of encryption. A growing number of officials have called on companies to offer government agencies a backdoor into their encrypted tools in the wake of the Paris attacks, even though officials have not presented any evidence that the Paris attackers even used encryption. To see our recent interview with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald on encryption, mass surveillance, and the aftermath of Paris, go to democracynow.org. In Britain, prison authorities are investigating the death of a 21-year-old transgender woman who was found dead in the all-male Leeds prison in West Yorkshire last Friday. Vicky Thompson had identified as female since her mid-teens. She and her lawyer had repeatedly asked for her to be relocated to a woman's prison. The FDA has for the first time approved a genetically modified animal as fit for human consumption and for sale across the United States. The genetically engineered salmon, known as the AquaVantage salmon, has been genetically modified to grow to market size twice as fast as a real salmon. The approval comes despite fierce opposition from consumer and environmental activists. Today marks the first anniversary of the death of Akai Gurley, the 28-year-old African-American man who was shot to death by New York police officer Peter Lang in the dimly lit stairwell of a Brooklyn housing project. Officer Peter Lang has pleaded not guilty to second-degree manslaughter and other charges. Meanwhile, in Michigan, white police officer William Melendez has been found guilty of assault and misconduct after pummeling and tasing 58-year-old unarmed African-American Floyd Dent in January. Officer Melendez is nicknamed RoboCop, as has been sued repeatedly for excessive force. In New Jersey, Princeton students have ended a 32-hour sit-in at the university president's office after administrators signed a commitment to begin conversations about addressing campus racism. The sit-in began Wednesday amidst massive national student protests. Princeton students are demanding the removal of Woodrow Wilson's name. As president, he ordered the resegregation of restrooms and cafeterias in Washington government buildings. In some federal offices, he ordered screens to be set up to separate black and white workers. His racist views were so widely known at the time that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote an open letter to Woodrow Wilson in which he called Wilson's policies, quote, the gravest attack on the liberties of African Americans since emancipation. And in New York City, Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez was inducted into the Deadline Club's New York Journalism Hall of Fame yesterday at Sardi's in Manhattan. Juan Gonzalez is the first Latino journalist to be selected for the Hall of Fame. He will be inducted along with PBS host Charlie Rose, New York Times journalist Max Frankel, 60 Minutes correspondent Leslie Stahl, ProPublica founder Paul Steiger, and Time magazine journalist and editor Richard Stolley. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.
And Juan, congratulations.
Oh,
it was
thank
really,
you.
and next
week
we're going to play your speech, your acceptance speech, which was so deeply moving.